Israel-Palestine, the West Bank, in the Jordan River Valley is a place called Khirbet Humsah. In Khirbet Humsah lives a Bedouin community. Lived a Bedouin community. Bedouins are historically nomadic Arabs. These particular Bedouins living in Khirbet Humsah are apparently semi-nomadic. This community of 11 herding families have had a terrible November, because on November 3rd, while we were all frustrated they hadn't called Arizona yet, this Bedouin community was frustrated that they were all homeless now. At around 11 a.m. on Tuesday morning, the residents of Khirbet Humsah were shocked to see a caravan of Israeli military jeeps, accompanied by a number of bulldozers and excavators heading down the dirt pathway to their village. The soldiers often come here to evacuate us when they have military training, Fatima Abu Awad told Mandawais as she sat amidst the rubble of what was her home just 24 hours earlier. While we were all at home watching John King and Steve Kornacki poke around their respective election calculators, assaulting us with vote counts, letting us pretend we were participating in democracy and not just watching a Twitch stream of someone playing with the map, this woman was sitting in front of a pile of detritus that the day before was still in the shape of a house. Now, okay, everything was election coverage on November 3rd, and the 4th, and the 5th, fine. But then there was after. And here's the thing. Mainstream outlets, CNN, MSNBC, Fox, PBS, BBC, that's hundreds of hours of broadcasting a week. I found only one video report on this specific incident. Here it is.
صارعت إسرائيل في عمليات الهدم وضم المناطق الأغوار.
They didn't even have fucking music in that clip. Those stupid magic walls have cost as much as $80,000, and NBC didn't have $50 for VO. Now, there was one solid interview, credit where it's due, that Ayman Moyeldin did on MSNBC with a different Palestinian who was kicked out of his home.
What are you hoping a Biden administration will do differently than a Trump administration or this outgoing Trump administration? Do you think there will be a difference?
No, I'm not hoping for much, and let me tell you why. In 2009, when the Israelis took over our home the first time, they did so under the Obama administration with Joe Biden as a VP. Biden and Obama and Trump are just an acceleration of an outstanding, unconditional, and long-standing American support for Israel that has never been questioned.
And that interview was great, but that's the entirety of the Palestinian representation in the mainstream media. And here is an incredibly frustrating aspect to this. Part of the story is that Secretary of State Mike Pompeo was scheduled to visit one of these illegal settlements in the West Bank, which no Secretary of State has ever done, so this was a departure in policy, and the idea is that he and the Trump administration are trying to cement their agenda with Israel on their way out the door. Plus, he visited a winery. The liberal media's coverage of this, as with all things, are extremely conditional, because, as could have been predicted, Mike Pompeo, breaking with this tradition and visiting the winery, absorbed all of the coverage. And this only signals to leftists that, yes, the liberal press, and of course I'm not even bothering to include Fox News because they're worthless, the liberal press are operating in bad faith and aren't the least bit interested in injustice and incurred suffering, which is ostensibly the original motive for covering this at all. Yet it's mostly absent. Why does this happen? Two reasons. First, half the pundits and politicians are just unconditionally pro-Israel anyway. Biden's had a long history with AIPAC and J Street. In 2019, 398 members of Congress voted for a resolution condemning BDS. 2/3 of Congress attended AIPAC this year. Then there are the journalists, Thomas Friedman, Bret Stephens, Barry Weiss. Wolf Blitzer started his career in Israel writing for a conservative newspaper. And actually, while researching this, I found that Joy Reid once called Wolf Blitzer AIPAC flack, which is cool, which brings us to reason number 2, flack. Basically, getting disciplined for being insufficiently pro-Israel. Joy Reid apparently used to update her blog with posts really sympathetic to Palestine, which is why the Zionist Organization of America tried to get her fired from MSNBC in 2018. Reading the headlines of her old blog, it seems like at one point she was actually kind of a leftist. Of course, she doesn't engage with any of that anymore. Looking through the archive, she hasn't even said the word Palestine on air in 10 months. But unlike in her blog days, she makes a few $1,000,000 a year and has a national audience, which are great incentives to not do things that incur a lot of flack. And nothing generates flack better than criticizing Israel. Remember when Mark Lamont Hill was fired from CNN for a speech he gave at the UN criticizing Israel? Noam Chomsky's been barred from entering Israel. Norman Finkelstein basically had his whole teaching career obliterated for criticizing Israel. And I'm sure none of that is very fun, so lots of incentive to not have to go through it. But with that, I think I'm going to sign off. Subscribe, it helps other people find this, and now, NBC's coverage of Palestine.